that given that climate change is a class issue, as over 90% of our emissions are produced by the richest 1% of people, how are you going to address this issue?
Dylan, that's an amazing question. And so accurate and so spot on. And I think one of the really key things, and the simple things from what power I would have and how I could address things, would be to look at things like transport and about how we operate our city and how we operate just the very dull and tedious things like new buildings, about green belt and about those sorts of issues. So one of the conversations that's come up when I was talking about the green belt was around the fact that people want to build on our green spaces, but not social housing with any public transport links and options for people to be close to work and to commute, but 4-bedroom detached houses with really large drives to put your selection of Range Rovers on. That's something you're not going to see happening with the Green Mayor. That's not part of it. And one of the questions right at the start, I really apologise, I forgot who asked it of me, but about could we home people in empty houses? That's also part of it, is where can we put, what can we do with our empty spaces that we've got and our accessible brownfield sites to make sure we're building in a way that we aren't empowering people to just go and buy more cars, where we've got proper systems in place where people can access public transport and to get around when people are near work. And also looking at just things like, how is work going to change after the pandemic? So there's one site quite local to me where they want to build a huge office development on greenfield sites, and there is not one form of public transport going into that at all. It's all roads. And what we've seen over the pandemic and over lockdown is that actually it is sort of very much the privileged workers who are the ones who are able to work at home, because it isn't, nurses and bin men and people who stock our shelves. They can't do that from home. They're still having to travel. So it's looking at how do we address that and how do we impact on those people to sort of say, do you know what, do they have to come in? And if they do have to come in, can we make them travel in a better way? Another thing that I would be looking at is around the airport and about travel and about incentivizing using greener forms of transport for long distance travel. So using rail, and trying to discourage the discounts that we're seeing this government put through on flights and aviation, so that encourages people to travel. So we've seen over the last few weeks that we've had a cut in aviation rates, we've had a cut in petrol or no increase in petrol prices, and yet massive increase in rail fares. That doesn't impact on the 1%. That impacts on the day-to-day people getting about their business, and that's all very much very wrong. So I think the real message is that green policies are very much at the heart of who I am. Obviously, that's relatively as an easy sell, I hope, to convince you as a Green Party member. But I am a Green Party member because I recognise those issues and I recognise the problems that come with the actions of the 1%. And as mayor, I can't change an awful lot of that in the way that I would love to see society change. That's just the limitations of the role. But within Greater Manchester, what I can do is put those sorts of that awareness and to build on the awareness that our young people have to really promote that, to say this isn't okay and these are how we're going to change, just simple, small things at a time. But each one of those makes a big difference. And transport and getting around our city and how it operates and how accessible it is without having to rely on your Range Rover is going to be a really key part of that, and something I really want to see change quite quickly if I was elected.
Thank you for that answer. I just got a quick follow-up on that one. Would you stick to the current Greater Manchester target for carbon net neutrality of 2038? And if so, how would you reach this measurably?
That's another excellent question. I think it needs to be reviewed fully. So I think the first thing would be to sit down and see how they've come up with that number. I would be very much pushing for that to be a lot quicker. I've sort of glibly said on a number of occasions when I've been speaking to the press, there is no planet B. And that drives me, and that is the heart of everything I do and say. And that is a really key thing. We need to act now, and we need to be doing everything we can now before we just destroy the entire planet. So actually every small step that I can take, and everything that we can encourage, and every step that we can do, to just really try and lead the way, I think, as well as have an impact, but to really demonstrate what can be done by a city region. And that can be accessible travel and making people be able to leave the cars at home, not just put a congestion charge in, because that doesn't impact, as Dylan rightly pointed out. How does putting a congestion charge in place actually impact on the 1% who are the generators of carbon emissions? Let's try and go for real fundamental modal shift when it comes to transport and moving around our city. Let's free up and stop even considering building on green belts. Let's look at how we can reuse land and reuse empty properties and reuse and regenerate. And I talk quite often about make, do and mend. And it's a very old-fashioned slogan that was around in the war when resources were short and resources were tight. And I use it quite deliberately because resources are short and time is very, very tight. And so it is looking at what can we do across the city region. And even if it is seemingly small steps, let's do those. But also very much, as I've mentioned before, we need to stop having everyone who works and is employed by the local authorities. We need to stop having their their pensions invested in fossil fuels. That's just, to me, is absolutely unforgivable and something that needs to be addressed immediately, particularly when even on a practical level, they are losing money from the pension funds by investing in fossil fuels. So there isn't even an argument that can be made to counter my position to say, oh, but we're making loads of money and everyone's going to have a better pension. That isn't even true. So yes, I think it's really important to address that, but that's at the heart of being a green, is to make sure that is addressed.
So I am a proponent of passive house building. I bring that into this because at the moment, the developers are saying, oh, it's too costly to build them, so we can't mass produce them. We know they're lying because they've been mass produced elsewhere in the world at a very affordable price. And actually having Greater Manchester, a diktat across Greater Manchester saying, all buildings to achieve these housing standards. The likelihood is that the developers will take us to the High Court and say this is unlawful, and that's when you challenge it. And doing that makes us challenge government in Westminster to say, actually, you could actually set this law and pass this law across the entire country. Why aren't you? And it's that soft power of lobbying and getting laws changed through the legal system, which is what will happen if you start putting in place a lot of these decisions.
With the current Greater Manchester carbon neutral target of 2038, taking into account aspects of social justice, how would you measurably try and achieve any targets you want?
So that's actually a difficult question. Well done. It is going to be difficult to measure, and it is going to be, we're going to see some of it as we start putting in place some climate change initiatives to reduce our carbon footprint, reduce our air pollution. We're going to see how it affects the poorest first. And I go back to my point of those community hub points. If you've got those people in communities, they can actually all feed back and feed up into the combined authority and say, actually, this is what it's doing to this community. This is how it's affecting us. We need to stop this because it is going to be detrimental. We're always going to have air pollution figures, and we need more air pollution monitors across Greater Manchester. We need NO2 monitors capability on them as well. Those are always measurable. Again, you go back to the recycling rates and the incineration rates, they'll always be measurable. We will be able to know how much we're recycling, how much we're incinerating, how much we're putting in landfill. So those things will all be combined in to, over the next 10 years, to actually map our carbon footprint as a city region, and our plan of improvement and progress. I mean, I would aim for 35, by the way, 35, if not 2035, or even 2030 for real visual change, as opposed to 2038.
I absolutely agree with you that we have to make the polluter pay. So those that are the most polluting need to face the biggest charges, the biggest taxes. So I'll give you an example. I'm under attack from the Conservative candidate for agreeing with her government that a clean air zone is a good idea. Now, a clean air zone, if we were to introduce it in Greater Manchester, it's not a congestion charge, as she claims it is. What it is if you drive a polluting vehicle around Greater Manchester, you will be charged until you change that vehicle to a non-polluting vehicle. And the effect of this policy will be to particularly go after those bus companies who currently are putting some of their oldest buses on Oxford Road. They're trying to rake in the money, but they're not investing that in putting decent buses on our roads. That will make them pay for the change, which is to clean up our air and clean up. And it is a class issue, because the kids in Greater Manchester who breathe in the most polluted air often are from the poorest communities, because often they have the biggest roads going, go through or go near to their community. So it's not an acceptable state of affairs. The only thing is, if it's if it's smaller businesses like taxi drivers or people who drive a van we are going to help them change their vehicle. So we're not going to, make the smaller people who can't afford to change their vehicle, we'll help them. But the bigger players, those who run big HGV companies or big bus companies, absolutely, they should be putting the newest vehicles on the road in Greater Manchester, rather than sending all their old bangers to pollute our roads. So that is a good, very relevant example as to how we will put the principle you spoke of into practice. And I would hope the Conservative candidate might support the policy of her own government, but she seems to be using it for political point scoring right now.
Could you give us some examples of what you've already done or put in place to tackle the climate crisis?
I'm not building it, because it makes me sound like I'm out there with my bricks and my cement every day, but we are building the biggest cycling and walking network in the country, called the B network. 160 million pounds worth, actually more, to be honest. That was the money I put in, but the councils are adding to that, so it's currently up to about 250 million. Every Greater Manchester Combined Authority, if you listen to it, I'm not sure that many of you will do, because it's a bit boring maybe, but if you did, every month I'm saying, right, here's a new scheme for Chorlton. On Friday I passed one for Wigan. We are, and Bury got a whole load on Friday. We are constantly building chunks of the B network, and no other city region in the country is doing that. No one has backed cycling and walking like we have. And that is a massive investment, I would say, in a cleaner, greener Greater Manchester. So there are other examples I could give to you, but that is a tangible one that I can point to as a decision I took. I was given money from the government. I had to choose to prioritize. I could have built a road. I could have built, I don't know, another tram stop, or I could have done a whole range of things with it. But I decided to put all of the money into cycling and walking. And everyone at the time said, "What are you doing that for? No one's going to." But I think it was the right decision, because that infrastructure is part of a green city region in the future.